Hello, this is Nick here from Gorgon Reviews. I am talking with David Fortune, the director of the new movie Color Book. Color Book is about a single father adjusting to life after his wife's passing while raising his son with Down syndrome. And they embark on a journey through Atlanta to attend their first baseball game. Thank you so much for spending time here today, David.
Pleasure to meet you, man. Thank you so much.
Now, to get us in the movie talking spirit,
hmm
what is the first movie you remember seeing in theaters?
Mm, it was Inspector Gadget.
The live action one?
Yes, yes, yes. I saw it, I think when I was 5 years old. Um,
Hmm.
I went with my mom's friend and two daughters. And so I remember, seeing that film in the movie theaters. And I can't tell you how I felt. It was just like, it was just so great to just go out to a movie theater. That was what I was more enamored with, was like, I get to go to the movies. And so it was a fun time.
Looking at your career, you started to write, direct, and produce short films starting in 2015 or so. When did you know you wanted to make a career out of this?
Mm, 2013. 2013, that's when I first got involved. I remember my friend, he came out of a classroom and he was like, "Hey, I just got a class and all we do is watch movies." And I was like, "What? Like sign me up. Like I'm down." And then I registered for the class because it was still like early, it was still early in the semester where you could, switch out your courses. And I remember coming into class and all we did was like watch movies from like the 1900s, like 1906 and going back that far. And I remember watching these silent black and white films and I was like, what did I get myself into? I thought we was gonna watch Transformers. I thought we was gonna watch like The Dark Knight. Like I thought like, yo, we was gonna watch like Bad Boys 2 and stuff. But it was a history course when it came to like the story of cinema. And but there was one film I watched called Bicycle Thief.
Hmm.
And I remember watching that film, and despite it being in black and white and made in 1940s and being spoken in Italian, I resonated with it. It reminded me of my upbringing in Decatur, Georgia, where you didn't have much resources, but you did the best that you could. And, from that moment on, I thought about the emotions that it gave to me. And I was like, man, this feeling that I'm having watching this movie, I want to give to others. And from there on, I decided, I was like, I want to go down this path. I want to explore, what's for me in cinema and visual storytelling. And I never looked back since then.
Well, Color Book is your first feature-length film that you've directed and wrote. Where
Yes.
did this idea for the story come from?
I just really want to tell a story of a single black father and his son.
Hmm.
I just wanted to be with two characters and spend a day with them, and we as an audience, all we are is just guests in their home, So this film wasn't about exposition and what does Lucky do for work and where does Mason go to school. It's about, yo, we just chilling and kicking with these two individuals on the east side of Atlanta, Georgia. And but it wasn't until I started speaking with parents who was raising children who have Down syndrome and hearing their perspective and understanding, what was going on in their lives, I then decided to kind of formulate this, story of a black father and son with the experience of, parents a part of the disability community and bringing that perspective because we don't see that in cinema much often, particularly within the black community perspective. And so it was just something that naturally formed.
From first concept of this is the movie you want to make to the release, how long do you think the process took?
2 years,
Oh,
2 years. Because I started writing. I actually, I'll say I'll give it 3 years because I started off making the short film first.
mm.
So I made this short film called Us, which is about a black father trying to teach his son with Down syndrome how to play baseball. And that was funded by the Netflix Content Creators Program. And from that short film, I was like, man, I was like, there's more to be told here, right? We just spend the day, with them on the baseball field, but I want to see what's their home life like. I want to see how do they go to sleep? How do they wake up? What do they eat for breakfast? Do they pray? Don't they pray? I wanted to get that full experience. And so I decided to then dive in and write the feature film version. And so I didn't start writing the feature film version until the fall of 2022. And then from the fall of 2022, that's when I applied to AT&T Untold Stories program. We won the award for $1 million in 2023, and then we premiered the film in 2024. So
Yeah,
I'll say from the short film version to the release, about 3 years.
it's nice, nice. I'll do at least one obvious or expected question. Where did the title come from and why did you shoot it in black and white?
And my response is that like there's always this expectation of this artistic genius like merging of black and white and color book. And it's simply because I suck at selecting titles for film. Like I'm the worst at it in history. I don't think there's any director that's worse than David Fortune when it comes to title selections in film. Do the history run. I'm the worst at it. So as a way to like to deal with it, what I do is I try to find a small item in the movie that reflects the true essence of the story. And so when digging through Color Book, I was like, this sketchbook tells the story of their day. And it reflects the theme that is not about the destination, it's about the journey. And then so then when I looked at it, I was like, well, sketchbook doesn't really sound appealing. So then I was like, all right, it's a coloring book. But then I was like, coloring book, there's just too much words. Cut it down. Color book. And I was like, that fits. That radiates the emotion of the story, the innocence, but also the heaviness. And so there was no genius like thought in finding the title of the film, to be honest with you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to disappoint.
Well, speaking of naming, you gave the dad character the name of Lucky,
Mhm.
and the film shows he's kind of anything but, at least in that day. Did you feel bad for writing someone to experience so many setbacks? Because you could have had him have a pretty nice day, you know?
Man, so even just the name of Lucky, it wasn't this, high genius level thought process I was, putting myself in. It was just more of, his backstory. There was a tragic event that happened in his home and he survived it. And he survived it as an infant. And so his mom since then always called him Lucky.
Mm,
And so it was just more so like, a name that was birthed from the idea of survival. And I think that still resonates with him, in this present day story as an adult, is that despite, him losing his wife, despite him raising his son as a single parent, he's still persevering. He's still surviving. He's still pushing through. And in the end, he still is lucky. His day wasn't, but but nonetheless, it's a reflection of like his character.
mhm. So on that note, William Catlett, who plays the dad,
Yeah.
his stock is kind of on the rise right now because he was recently also in Abigail, Never
Mm,
Let Go just last year, and a bunch of others. And I think he gives a pretty emotionally charged performance in Color Book. How'd
yeah.
you know he was your Lucky?
I knew it from like years before. So I saw him do a short film called Black Boy's Joy, which is on Max currently. Or
Mhm.
is it still called Max or HBO Max?
I think we
I
got a
look.
couple months.
So yeah, Max. And then I saw his portrayal as a father and just how natural he was. And I remember thinking, I'm like, man, I kind of want this authentic performance to be, showcased in Color Book because he showed anger, he showed sadness, he showed joy, he showed, a sense of integrity as a father in that short film. And for me, I was like, that's what I want to apply to Color Book. And so he was in my lookbook that I sent out to my producers when pitching the film. And
Mhm.
so he was there. He was considered so early on, earlier than I would could even remember, to be honest with you.
Mhm. Similarly, Jeremiah plays Mason, did a great performance as well. It's less of a question of how did you know he was the right one, because I'm sure also just in general you were pretty limited on that
Yeah,
scope. But so,
there.
is there any fun experiences you wanted to share about working on the film in between takes or anything with him?
Jeremiah is a ball of joy. I remember like me and Will would be on set And me and Will will be so focused and so serious. We'll just have like really hard discussions. And so Jeremiah would come in laughing, everybody's playing with him, and he would just break up the mood of this serious, tense moment that me and Will is having because we're getting ready for the scene.
Yeah.
We're getting ready to do something heavy. So we're locking in. And Jeremiah would come in laughing. Everybody wants to hug Jeremiah. Everybody's wanting to like be around him. He was like the popular kid on set. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this boy did. And I want him to take on this serious move, but that's the beauty of it. He provides that charm, that essence that the story needed. And honestly, what we needed during the making of Color Book, because it's like we needed to smile, we needed to laugh in moments of like heavy, tense story scenes. And so like I just remember him coming to set every day with a smile on his face and everyone crowding around him. And I had to tell like my AD, I was like, nobody's not allowed to touch Jeremiah until we see him at his one. So he was a ball of joy.
Mhm. So there are a lot of scenes on buses and subway throughout it.
Yeah.
But there is one scene in particular, about two-thirds of the way through the film, I'll say, involves a subway and some law enforcement. And,
Mm,
um,
yeah.
personally, I know I was afraid during that long sequence of events. I was sobbing at points.
Mm,
Everything felt knocked up to 11.
mm,
It's a standout scene to me, but I'm curious if there is something else you might think is your proudest scene or shot of the film.
mm. That's a really great question. I'm not usually, asked that about like what's my favorite scene. Sometimes you just go in and you just
All of
talk
it.
about the
It's
movie.
perfect.
But I would say I love the argument scene between Lucky and Mason when he's trying to teach his son how to write his name, and
Mm,
then Mason keeps playing around, and and it just turns into just an explosion, like Lucky just letting out his frustration on his son. And I love that scene because it reflects that this story isn't a fantasy of a father and son relationship. It showcased that there's some, there's tension, when
mm,
it comes to a relationship. There's heartbreak when it comes to a relationship. There's fights in relationships. And so it paints the picture that, this film isn't isn't an inspirational story. This film is an immersive experience between the relationship dynamics between a father and him raising his son who has a disability.
mm.
And I love that scene because it paints what I was trying to say about the story from the get-go, that it's about a relationship, first and foremost, before it's anything else.
Mhm. Variety named you recently as one of the 10 directors to watch for, so congratulations on that. Which
Thank you.
leads me to this final question. What else is in the wings for you to watch for after Color Book?
Uh, I can't go too deep into that.
Hmm.
There's, projects that, I'm currently involved in and just I would say I'm in my tunnel making.
Okay.
And so I'll say that I'm not just touching film, but I'm also touching television.
Mm,
Um, because I also want to make sure that I tell stories from the Atlanta perspective when it comes to storytelling about our city and our community. And so I do have my second feature film written and it explores the theme of home. But I'm also diving into television as well and telling stories that are more elongated because, series is such a beautiful way to character develop and dive into a perspective of a human being. And so I'm touching both points.
you are not taking a break.
No, I look, the film came out in 2024. I had a year to recover. I had a year to, because I know we got to go, but I remember making Color Book after I finished, premiering Color Book at Tribeca. Everyone was asking me, they was like, all right, so what's next? And I was like, I just made a film. Get off my back. Let me recover first. But I had a year and it's been a great year. And I'm happy to have completed the draft of my second feature. I'm happy to even exploring the draft of my third feature.
Mm.
So I'm good to go and I'm ready to make again.
Once again, thank you so much for spending your time answering some questions about
Yes.
directing the film Color Book and your career up to this point. It is playing two times at SIFF on Saturday, May 24th and Sunday, May 25th. It will also be on the SIFF streaming channel after the event is done. You will be at both screenings, which I've already heard is only on like standby tickets only at this point, along with
Mm.
the producer Kristen Uno. Any final words you want to share?
So Will Catlett and Jeremiah Daniels will also be at the screening.
Ooh.
So if you guys want to come and connect with Will and Jeremiah and hear their stories and their perspective, please come up and pull up because we're excited to connect with this community of Seattle and all the filmmakers who will be attending the festival.